going to conduct a quick review, as short as possible. And we have come quite a ways into the whole history of the world, well, to more extent. And last week's year and the week before, we have been talking about something called the Chithonius of history. Chiton means the exterior of history. In other words, the various different events and evolutions, convolutions of human events, at least in the biblical times and in the modern era as well. What I'd like to do today is to talk about the Pneumius of history, which is to some extent has to do with the interior of the movement of history, the interior of that. Let me just review what we did last week and so on, just to get a feel with where we're holding right now, because it's important to remember what I said last week and grasp that, because we're going to use that information and take it deeper into an interior level. The story of mankind. That's it. Adam, Toldos, his generations, Shloshim, the roots, Anapim, the branches, number 1, Anapim, branches, number 2. All men from the beginning to the end of time are contained in this classification, and there are no exceptions. Adam. The world starts with Adam, with a specific task of transforming, or being mezacheh, transforming physical reality. Adam's neshama, generalized, universal neshama, the super soul that contains the neshama of all of mankind. Adam failed. Adam failed, but as against Adam, there exists the whole Olam Haba. Adam was supposed to create an entire Olam Haba by himself. One man, one incredibly huge, holy neshama, had the ability to transform all reality and make an Olam Haba. Adam failed. What happened? The task is given to his children, to the generations that follow him, called the Toldos. These are the generations that follow the children. But the task that's given to the children is given in a specific, structured way. And this is what's very important to remember. Adam was a super soul, and when he failed to do it, what happened was the task was delegated to the generations that came from him. But the generations that came from Adam are subdivided into two central components, what's called Shloshim and what's called Anapim. These two together, the Shloshim and the Anapim, must do together what Adam should have done alone. So the Toldos, who now have a delegated task, are called Shloshim and Anapim. What are the Shloshim and what are the Anapim? The Shloshim constitute the first 20 generations, from Adam to Noah, that's 10 generations, and from Noah to Avram, or the Zohar Ploga, constitutes the next 10 generations. These are 20 generations from Adam to Avram. These 20 generations are referred to as Shloshim. Everyone after that, after Avram, his son Yitzchak, his son Yaakov, the 12 tribes that came from them, the 70 souls or people that came from the 12 tribes right before the entry into Egypt, and finally the 600,000 Jews that remained when the Exodus occurred. 70 Jews entered Egypt, 600,000 left, meaning 600,000 men over 21, because the census was only on men over 21. It really included several million if you count the women and children. But in terms of that, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and everything until the 600,000 are called Anothim. That's the structure of it. What is the difference between a Sheresh and an Anoth? The difference is the following. The difference is in the way they relate to the objective called Olam Haba. Adam related to Olam Haba in the sense that he was the essential instrument of creating Olam Haba. The Shloshim, his children, related to Olam Haba in the sense they are the major constructors of Olam Haba. They constructed, so to speak, the major aspects of Olam Haba. They had within their neshamas spiritually to devise the major outlines of what Olam Haba would look like. That's what a Sheresh is. A Sheresh with respect to Olam Haba is a major contractor. Once they finish their job, their children, the children of the Shloshim, meaning the children from Avram, or actually the children from the 20th generation after Adam and onwards, were called Anothim. It was their job to construct the minor details of Olam Haba. They would put in all the finishing touches, the exterior and interior decoration, if I may use the metaphor. We're not dealing with decorations, we're not dealing with buildings. But if you want to use a metaphor, the metaphor is that the Shloshim related to the major construction and the Anothim related to the minor construction. That was the difference between Shloshim and Anothim with respect to Olam Haba. Now Adam was supposed to do it all. Adam, the job of Adam and his power or the ability that lay in his neshama was the ability to construct both major and minor aspects of Olam Haba. Having failed, those aspects were redistributed structurally to two different classes, Shloshim and Anothim. Do we understand that? That's the function of these different elements with respect to Olam Haba. But what about with respect to themselves?
The one thing that I want to make sure I understand is that you're saying that until they did it, Olam Haba did not exist.
No, Olam Haba did not and does not exist. Olam Haba does not exist until the end. When the last honor is finished. They had the potential to construct.
But they didn't.
No, they didn't. But what I'm speaking here is in potential. They had the ability or the power to construct it. Just like Adam had a power to construct both major and minor aspects of Olam Haba, right? The Shloshim had the ability to construct the major and the Anothim the minor, but they did not. Okay.
So that means that we're basically Shloshim.
What's that? No. Well, that's not true. They did. They did construct it. Well, let me just get into that. They did construct it. Avram constructed it. It was constructed.
So you said it doesn't exist.
Well, it exists in design, but not in the compass, not in actual design. That's the way to divide it. Yeah, that's the best way. The actuality of Olam Haba is not here because there's no zichuch. There's no zichuch. This is where Olam Haba is coming from. We don't see an Olam Haba, but the design of Olam Haba is dependent, is a function of their ability. And the design itself was left up to man. Man would design how large or how small, how great or how superior that Olam Haba would be. So these are the architects of Olam Haba. And this is the division of their architectural task. Do you see what we mean? Now, What was related to Shloshim Anofim with respect to themselves? The following. Those who had the capacity to construct the major features of Olam Haba had the capacity to create what's called human spiritual breeds. Meaning that if a Shorish was a tzaddik, then the Anofim which came from him would have a very strong inclination to be a tzaddik at birth. In other words, they weighted the free will to one direction. Because what a Shorish was able to do, it creates what's called a root soul, which they possess. This souls were called root souls, that's why it's called Shorish, roots. They had a root soul, so that all the Anofim that came from that Shorish would follow the essential status in which that neshama reached, to its major inclinations. And the Anofim would have their own free will within the minor inclinations. So that if a Shorish who lived at the time between Adam and Avram would become a tzaddik, the children that would be born to him after from Avram, the Anofim, all those that were descended from that Shorish would, upon birth, have very strong sensitivity to spirituality and have very strong desires of compassion and of truth and so on, and would have a very great desire to be a tzaddik. Now that doesn't mean that that person, that honor couldn't be a Rasha, not necessarily, but he would have to fight enormously hard to be a Rasha, because he'd have to go against the grain of his neshama, because the grain of his neshama was already predetermined by his shirish. So therefore the shirish had the ability to create a breed of men. Depending on whether that shirish was a tzaddik or Rasha, that was essentially the directions of his Anofim. If you had a shirish who was a Rasha, then his children would have very strong desires to what? To rebel against the Rebbeinu Shalom. Just like that. And they would have an innate capacity, just a hereditary, spiritual desire to go in that kind of direction. Why is that? Because we see that the job of Olam Haba was given to major and minor status. So the Shirish, who had the major status, essentially was the one who had to construct the major elements of Olam Haba. The other was only had to construct the minor elements in Olam Haba. So that kind of bechira or free will in which a Shirish required was not necessary for an honor. Now again, the first 20 generations is what we're talking about. From Adam to Avram, these were the Shloshim. Who? Meshuselach, Hanoich, Shem, Eva. These people. Chom, Yosef, the sons of Noah, all these people were Shloshim. And of course, what it does is it tells us very clearly that mankind was essentially heterogeneous with respect to the abilities of Olam Haba. And this is what I pointed out last week, and it's something you must realize very critically, that man has not always been the same. We think that men have been the same throughout time, but just have varied in culture, or varied in terms of what they know about the world, or technology, or economic system, or political system, or whatever have you. That's not true. The essential distinction between men is that they varied within their internal essence. They have literally become different species throughout time, so that the men who lived from Adam to Avram were an entirely different species of human beings, never again to be repeated. They were like supermen, but not physical supermen. They were spiritual supermen. And their neshamas were so much vastly superior to what we have, that you literally could not even deal with their powers and the kind of spiritual access they had. If one of those Shloshim lived today with the force or power, that spiritual power in him, he would dominate the earth. They were like titans in a way, but they were spiritual titans. The wisdom and the understanding that they would possess, the way they would understand ruchnius or spirituality, was something that no one today could even begin to understand because of the neshama that they had. But that category of Shloshim ended by Avram, and it was supposed to end by Avram. But that's what a Shirish is. A Shirish creates a human species. An honor is the result or the consequence or the expression of that species. What's called the extension of that species. Now, this is essentially the theoretical aspect, but practically what actually happened. What happened was a very strange thing. What the Buddhism observed after the Shloshim finished what they were doing is that by the time it got to Noach, they were so terrible that the Buddhism had to wipe out the entire world except for Noach. So these Shloshim totally failed to do what they were supposed to do. All of them became Rishonim. And the only tzaddik basically that was around was Noach. There were some others. But Noach essentially remained as a tzaddik. So what the Buddhism said is, hey, what's going on over here? These Shloshim are destroying the world. So what he said is, let's start all over with Noach. And let's start the round again. So after Noach, again came the round of Shloshim. And what happened to that second round? The second round was not as bad as the first, but essentially was very similar. In the sense that the last thing that we find about that generation, and if you look in the schedule of Noach, which is this week, how does the schedule end? It ends with the Dor HaFlaga. And what is the Dor HaFlaga? The nations of the world at that time got together and decided to build a tower which would ascend, go up into the heavens, and from there they would war with God. Now that wasn't a physical tower they were really talking about. These are incredible vast krichas of power, spiritual power that they were using, which came from the powers of Tumah. And they thought that with these powers of Tumah they can actually eradicate spirituality and literally dominate the world. So the Buddhism saw this, and again he says, this is not going to work. But he didn't destroy that generation of Shloshim, like he did the first time. That generation, he simply introduced a new thing into the world which never existed before. And what was that? Different languages. Because before that time, all languages were one language. All men spoke the same language. Because all souls were the same. After that, what the Buddhism did was to divide those languages into many different languages, so that each language reflected the individual's spiritual capacity. And that's a very, very critical thing that we'll say right now. You will think that when we talk and we use words and sentences and so on, that the essential function of a language is to communicate. That's true, but that's a minor function of a language. The real function of a language is that the letters of the language and the way that it's used is a reflection on the people who use it. It's a reflection of what? It's a reflection on the spiritual status of a nation. Why do we see that? Because we know that when the Buddhism created the world, he used the letters of the Hebrew language. So that the letters themselves represent each one, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, represents a certain spiritual power or a certain spiritual force. Each letter is a certain configuration of a certain spiritual koyach or power as it descends into the world and begins to create. So the sum total of all these languages, of all these letters, which make up words, constitute really spiritual entities. That's why when Adam was first created, the Buddhism said to Adam, I want you to name all the living things in the world. What was the Buddhism saying to Adam? You think he was just asking, seeing what? The Buddhism could simply name as many things as he wanted? No. What the Buddhism was saying to Adam, I want you to name each animal, not by giving it a name, there's no chokmah in that. But I want you to name each animal, because you will be able to look at each different being and see the spiritual essence. And from that, you will be able to describe those letters that were used to create it. And that will become its name. So that its name is its spiritual origin. And that's what Adam did. He named all the animals. Essentially what he did was, he was able to look, at least with the neshama that he once had, into the basic spiritual essence of each living creature and describe exactly the spiritual forces that were used to create it. The languages, therefore, of all men were changed, because the language that they used is now a reflection of who they were. And if you think that the secret of that is lost, it's really lost. If we knew, and it's something that probably can be figured out, but if we understood how language reflects spiritual powers, we can study the language of any nation today and literally determine exactly what their spiritual status is. We can read the neshama of a nation just by understanding this language. That's an amazing thing, isn't it? But that's exactly what it is. The language is the mirror to the national soul of that ethnic group. The language has changed. The peoples were dispersed. and the era of Shloshim ended. What started was the era of Anophim. But wait, there was a big problem. Because what the Buddha discovered when he assessed all these Shloshim is that there were 71 different levels. There were 71 different spiritual breeds that were created by these Shloshim. 71. In other words, when we would evaluate all the various different Rishonim and Tzaddikim and all the levels of the Rishonim, and what he saw that there was a hierarchical number of 71, going from the worst of them all to the best of them. Number 1 was the worst, and number 71 was the best. With respect to what? With respect to the kind of spiritual sensitivity that it acquires through its actions. In other words, there were 71 different categories of neshama. Hence, there were 71 different categories of shurish or root neshama. And therefore, there will be 71 different categories of anophim. That means that there were 71 different levels of species of men. Literally different species. So that number 69 is entirely different than number 71, than number 18. If you meet someone who has number 18 is a number 18 honor, if I may use that term, and you compare him to a number 69 honor or number 57 honor, it's an entirely different person you're talking to. With respect to what? Not with respect to physical properties or characteristics, with respect to spiritual characteristics. That number 15 is so dull when it comes to spiritual pursuits. And he's so dense in understanding it that it's amazing that you can call him a human being as far that you can, it's almost incredible that you can say he has an neshama. Whereas number 57, who's much higher, you can see by talking to him, you see, the level of his spirituality and the insight that he has. And that's what happened. There were 71 different categories. Now, 71 different categories? Yes? No. But yes, there were 71 different categories, but as far as Olam Haba is concerned, there were only 2. Meaning that the first 70 categories that were made, all of them did not have the capacity to build an Olam Haba. None of them undid what Adam did. They all continued, and they amplified in what? In the kilkel or damage that he did. So 70 of these categories were inferior in terms of their ability to construct an Olam Haba. There was only one category that still retained that ability. Only one. So what did the Baruch Hashem do? The Baruch Hashem addressed that one shurish, and he says, you're the only one that's made it. You're the only one that kept the heritage of Adam Rishon. Everyone else is essentially forfeited. Because the neshamas are too small. It just won't work. Who was that church? That church was Avram. That's what Avram was. Avram is a church. And what Avram did was create a new species. A species of people who would come from him, who would have certain similar qualities to him, who would be able to create an Olam Haba. And he was the only one that created that species. So the Baruch Hashem says, I'm going to change my plan. Since I see all these shloshim, all the other root souls are totally inadequate, you see, I'm going to change my plan. What it is I'm going to let you construct Olam Haba. I'm going to take the whole Olam Haba and I'm going to put it on your head. Meaning that you with your neshama have the power to construct the entire thing. Never since Adam Rishon was such a thing possible. And that was all put on Avram. But Avram could not do it alone, because Avram was only a church. You have to remember, Adam was a super soul, meaning Adam was church and all of everything mixed into one. But Avram was only a church. So what the Baruch Hashem says, you and your Anophim, you have constructed the major elements of Olam Haba, your Anophim will construct the minor aspects. But you and your Anophim are the inheritors of Olam Haba. That's it. But the Baruch Hashem did not make this a fait accompli yet. He simply told us Avram, and the next step in the next week, because we're literally right now between the storms. Next week, which is Lech Lecha, you will see when the Baruch Hashem says to Avram, Lech Lecha me'atzcho, go out of your land to the land which I will show you. That was the command that Avram would be the church. That's it. You are the church. It starts from you. Where does it end? It ends with the last Anof. 600,000 Anofim. That is what the number of Anofim that are necessary to complete that particular job.
Doesn't that somehow contradict what you said before about the shrushim, that saying that all the shrushim that existed, whatever they put together, somehow didn't exist as of Abraham. Because after Abraham came in...
After Abraham, there were no more shrushim.
No, but I'm saying that the ones before.
For Abraham?
Yeah, if it's all laid on Abraham, what happened to all the things that they did before Abraham?
I mean, what happened to their entire thing? Abraham succeeded.
No, but you're saying that the shrushim
had failed, and they
were all moving, that each one had the potential, and they were laying the groundwork and building the plan, so to speak, drawing up the plans.
Right.
So until he came into being, there was no plans that existed?
Until Abraham came into being?
Yeah.
No. What happened is, by the time the shrushim finished, his piece of Olam Haba was constructed. The rest of it was not. Or rather, it was destructed.
So that means that nothing existed, no plan existed before Abraham, is what I'm asking.
No. The design did not exist until the end of the shrushim. They finished. The Banishim looked in terms of the finality of these shrushim, and he saw what they had wrought. He looked at the design of Olam Haba that ensued from their deeds, and he saw that only Avraham had constructed his share of Olam Haba, and the rest of them had destroyed their shares or done terrible damage to it. In other words, when the Banishim looked at with the Mitzvah Din and assessed the work that was done by the Shloshim, he saw that only Avraham had done what he was supposed to do. So Avraham's design aspect of Olam Haba was complete, and the rest of them, it was totally marred. Only 171 of Olam Haba was successfully completed. The rest was damaged. So the Banishim said, so obviously it's in your hands now, because you've done what you're supposed to do. So I will continue now with the Anofim, your Anofim, and they will finish up the minor details. You see, the minor details. What did the Banishim do with the rest of the Shloshim? What did he do with the rest of the bunch? Right? What happened to them? What happened to 70 out of 71 sections? The horror of what happened. What happened to the rest of these guys? So what the Banishim did was he went to the rest of them, and essentially he began to warn them that they've done terrible, terrible things, and that the Anofim will begin to assume from these people will all be Rishoyim. But the Banishim did not yet close these people or consolidate the damage until Matan Torah. Until Matan Torah, the Banishim waited. He waited from Avraham until the exodus from Egypt, until the giving of the law. At that point, the Banishim went around to all the nations of the world, and he offered them the possibility of retaining some section or some possession of Olam Haba. They turned him down. And essentially what they said to the Banishim is, we reject it, we're not interested. So what the Banishim said is, it's closed. In other words, from now on, Olam Haba only has to do with Avraham and his Anofim and his descendants. All you people have nothing to do with Olam Haba anymore. Nothing. That's it. Finished. Closed. And the door was shut. What does that mean? These other Shloshim were locked out of Olam Haba entirely. That's what it means. Because the Shloshim destroyed what they were supposed to construct, and the Anofim followed suit. So what it was is, all this entire section of Olam Haba was shut down really. And only Abraham's section was allowed to remain open. Now, the interesting question is, so what happened to these people? You see. So what happened to these people is a very strange thing. What the Banishim decided to do to all these other Shloshim and Anofim, the ones who failed, is that he decided them to keep them out of Olam Haba on a national basis. But what he would do, he would still allow them to live. And what he would do is that if they would do the mitzvahs and what they're supposed to do, if they would still behave, as the Banishim mentioned, he would give them Olam Hazeh. That's what he would give them. This world. In other words, these other people now have this world to look forward to. And that's it. They do not have a spiritual world. They only have it here and not elsewhere. So they have very nice homes to look forward to, beautiful clothes, great food, whatever you want, but that's it. At the end of their life, it's over. And that's the end of them. Their existence is annihilated. That's a very severe thing, an incredibly severe thing. But why did he do that? He did it because they wanted that. The Banishim didn't just do that. They forced it on him in the sense they chose in that direction. They felt that this life and what it had to offer was far more superior than developing a life of spirituality. Trying to find out what the Banishim is about and what you do with him. Trying to understand what his will was and to direct yourself in terms of relationship with God. They weren't interested. They wanted a relationship with themselves. They were interested in their own narcissism and their own egoism. That's essentially what it was. What are these people called who are descended from these Shloshim? What are these people called? Goyim. That's what they're called. And I don't say that condescendingly. I don't say that at all. Because there is no discrimination here. This is the Midas Hadin talking. The Banishim does not discriminate in any sense. These are all his creations. The Banishim only discriminates according to one main feature, your deeds, just like we do. When we throw a murderer in jail, are we discriminating against him? No. We're throwing him in jail because of his deeds. That's it. The Banishim looks at what you do, not at what you are. And in the basis of what they did, they completely destroyed essentially what they were supposed to do. And that's what it is. So the Banishim says, you leave me no other choice. Now, did the Banishim close that door forever on them? Not totally. Because there were two possibilities, two ways left open for them to recapture what they lost. One, as a church, as a nation, these 70 nations of the world, and that's why all the goyim in the world are called 70 nations. It's called the Shivim Ummah. The 70 nations of the world. That's what it is. And these 70 nations of the world come from where? From these 70 levels of the Shoshim. Now, are there really 70 nations in the world? Yes, there are. But you can't sit down and count them because they are not identical to you and Rasta. That's what it is. Because since that time till now, there have been incredible amounts of assimilation and intermixtures and intermarriages, so that the spiritual powers of these 71 different classes are completely intertwined and mixed. So you have to be a person with Ruach HaKodesh to really see a person and say, you are number 63. Or, the other way to do it is by understanding what's called the consequences of each church. For example, in the language. If we knew how to do it, we can see the language, and from the language, we can see exactly what the original class was. The only other way to do it would be Ruach HaKodesh. And there's no one that he can do that with Ruach HaKodesh. It'd be extraordinary. You have to look at a Goy's Neshama to know exactly what the Shurish was. Although there were people who could do that. Okay, let me see. One more idea and then I'll take questions. What we see from this is a very important thing which I've said before and I'll say again. Very critical. There has never been a species called the Goy. Never. This species is an aberrant form of Adam. What am I talking about? When God created mankind, man is not a physical being. Man is not like some kind of physical animal at all. What do we mean? Man has an neshama which is totally different from every living creature. And man has an neshama which can transform physical reality into an olam haba. That's what it means to be a man. To be a man doesn't mean simply what? I mean a man, woman. But to be a human being doesn't seem to be to what? To partake of physical pleasures or physical activities. That's not what a human being really is according to God's eyes. God wanted to create that. He could create a billion other animals if he wanted. God knows they jump around the planet Earth. What the Banishim created was a human being, was a being with incredible spiritual powers, even though he was physical in his manifestation or in his existence. And he wants that person to change the physicality of the world. When the Goyim, when the Shloshim refused and objected to this, what the Banishim was forced to do was to create a new type of human being that never existed before. a new concoction that never existed before, a human being that has thought and has scholar and understanding and has no spiritual power. That's a total aberration. I mean, we can't understand it's an aberration because we can't understand how you can even have spiritual power. That's how vacuous our world is. So you don't even know what I'm talking about because you're looking at it from your perspective. To you, well, what's a person? What is a human being? He's got a job. He goes to a job in the morning, comes home, opens up the TV and puts on the VCR, whatever the story is, and that's it. And then he goes to work the next morning. Ends off his career and retires and that is a human being. But that's a travesty of what a human being really is. And then total travesty and an aberration of what it is. What a human being really is someone who can gain the highest levels of spiritual awareness. That's what a human being is. With mind, with the intellectual ability and with the emotional ability. In tune with that intellectual ability. The neshama reaches the highest level. So what do we have now? You see, we have a shirish that doesn't even have that ability anymore. The version stripped the shoshim and the anofim, these other 70 levels, from that ability. So what is he? He's a thinking ape. That's exactly what was left, a thinking ape. A thinking animal. When Socrates defines a human being as a rational animal, he was 100% right. Because from him on, that's exactly what human beings were. Animals who think. But that is not the essence of a person. A person is not simply a gorilla with thoughts. You see, or something from the primates that happens to think. And because he thinks, he can advance. That has nothing to do with what it means to be a man. To be a man, really, to be a human being, is to be a certain kind of neshama. And that's what was the story. So at Matan Torah, a new species was created of human being, what's called a human being that no longer has spiritual powers. That's it. That's what a goy is. What is a Jew? A Jew is the original human being. A Jew is someone who is what? From the descendants of Avon through the mother, so that he retains the neshama that has the ability to create an olam haba. That's a Jew. A Jew is not a rational animal. He is not a primate that thinks. A Jew is what? Is a being who can use the spiritual force in him and totally change everything on the face of the earth. That's what a Jew is. A Jew is a reflection of primordial man. A Jew is a continuation of Adam Rishon. You see the gross distinctions here. That's the critical difference between a Jew and a Goy. And that distinction was created because of the Midas Hadin, the attribute of justice. Because that distinction and classification was done on the basis of men's deeds, of what they themselves demanded from the Bereshit himself. There were some questions? Yeah.
I still don't understand fully what you're saying talks to the lawyers because
I didn't get into the topic fully yet.
Can I say if you want to put it on the side for more?
Well, I'm going to get into that. So if
but it seems to me what you're describing now is like what you described with Adam, namely you have the original condition, bread of shame, and then you're put here to earn olam haba. Right?
No, that's...
And Adam blows it, and you say Adam should have been annihilated, but he wasn't, right? And then Tum is introduced in this whole thing. It's like that is being created again at the point where the Goyim are created.
Well, not really, because Adam, and this is what's critical, when Adam failed, what was changed was the subject, Adam, the man, not the objective. The objective remained olam haba. That was not changed. Right. But for the first time, with these 70 nations, the objective itself was changed, so that none of them had any access to olam haba at all anymore.
But why not annihilation?
Wait, because the Midas HaChesed, or the compassion of the Bnei Shalom, says, let's give them some level of gemul, some level of ability to attain some height. But there was more than that, because wait, we have said that Goyim as a whole, the 70 levels or the 70 classes of Goyim, nations, which exist on the world today, cannot get into Olam Haba directly, but there are two ways they can still get into Olam Haba, and that's one of the reasons why they were retained. One of the ways that they can get in is by being Magaya, if they convert to Judaism. And what they can do is, if they convert to Judaism, they can literally, a convert requires a new neshama. a neshama of the Shorish of Avraham. But yet there's another way how a guy can still have to do with Olam Haba. If he's an exemplary tzaddik as a guy, if he's a tzaddik as a guy, then he can have access to Olam Haba. Not like a Jew, but he can have access to Olam Haba. He can. These are called the Chasidu Umas Olam. So therefore the Baruch did not annihilate them. But the basic reason is that they still had entrance into Olam Haba, albeit on a vastly inferior way. And as long as you have some kind of entry to Olam Haba, the Baruch will not annihilate you. To those who are not involved in Olam Haba, he still allows the Goyim to at least partake of some simcha in their existence. In other words, he still rewarded them for their deeds. So that if a guy keeps the 7 mitzvahs of Noah and is essentially a mensch, sets up courts of justice and is very just and very fair and honest, and remains a tzaddik himself, really, he has enormous success in Olam Hazeh.
But the terms of our existence is ultimately Olam Haba. I mean, the whole Bria.
Our existence. Yeah.
That's right.
Yes.
So it's hard to see in terms of the way that you've laid the whole thing out till now how without retaining some potential of Olam Haba that
but they do have a potential. What is the problem? They do have a potential. They have two different ways that they can still have access to Olam Haba. That's why we don't convert Goyim. Why is it that Jews don't want us to convert Goyim? Are they more compassionate about Jews? They feel that if you're not baptized and you don't believe in Jesus, you're condemned to hell for all eternity. Isn't that what they believe? That's right. So therefore they say, we feel sorry for all you Jews, we want to convert you. You see, the real reason why they want to convert us is because they're so insecure about their own position. The only way they'll justify themselves in some way is to be able to take the original Shoshim. But the truth is, why don't we want to convert Goyim? If we know that they're doomed in some way, why don't we want out? Yes, we don't have to, because they're not doomed. You can be a Goy and still go into Olam Haba. You can. You want a bigger Olam Haba? You want a vastly superior type of Olam Haba? Then you have to become Jewish. But becoming Jewish is not simply membership in a higher level club in the elite. Being Jewish is work. It's 630 commandments. Schwer zu sein, Yid. It's very difficult to be Jewish. So, there's no gifts over here. But we say to a guy, why do you want to become Jewish for? Because you want to connect with spirituality? You can do it as a guy. It's not necessary to become Jewish. Now, that was the Anophim. And what should have happened, at Matan Torah there were 600,000 Anophim. And that should have ended it. But it didn't end it. Why? Because what happened was that those Anophim all worshipped the golden calf, the Chet of the Egel. And the Chet of the Egel was the same kind of Chet that Adam Rishon did when he ate the Sadat. So what the Jews did in the Midbar is destroy the possibility of that Anophim finishing the job. So what happened? Those Anophim then became primary Anophim, and they became roots themselves to secondary Anophim. And who are the secondary Anophim? All of us. All those Jews who were born from the time of Matan Torah to the end of time, to the Mashiach, are secondary Anophim. Meaning that the primary Anophim are our roots. You can imagine how small our neshamas are. Because we are branches of roots of the trunk called Adam. So we're 4 steps away in spiritual level from Adam Rishon. Adam, Sherish, primary Anaf, secondary Anaf. And we don't even relate to the secondary Anafim, because don't think for 1 minute that we who are branches of Anafim have anything like the first secondary Anafim, who are the prophets. Who are the secondary Anafim? Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu, these are secondary Anafim. Could you imagine? Rabbi Kiva, Hillel, these are secondary Anafim. Could you imagine that? If they're secondary Anafim, what are we? We're not even leaves. We're more like the worms that live on the leaves. Already. That's how far it's gone in that extent. But that's what it is. So that's essentially the picture. That's the picture of human history in terms of its species and subspecies. But remember, the reason why human history is subdivided this way has to do with the nature of Olam Haba. That's what it's about. It has to do with the way you construct Olam Haba. That's what it is. Olam Haba is constructed in a certain way, and that determines the nature of the human species, what a person is. Yeah.
If the 600,000 was a full complement, what were the women and children? They duplicate? And what were the women?
Well, woman, now you're going to this old favorite topic of ours. In this sense, what it is woman, the reason why the women are not counted and the men are, because the women are considered, for example, there are 600,000 men, right? Right? These are the total subdivision of Anafim. The woman, there are 600,000 pairs. The women are simply paired up to the 600,000. In other words, a wife is the pair of the husband with respect to his particular position. That's all it is. You know, instead of doubling it to 1,200,000, what you have is pairs of 600,000.
So what if there's a woman that isn't married?
That's okay. In the exact way that the nothing goes, that's already. I mean, there's a structure to it.
And what were the children?
The children are not enough. The children are already extensions of these enough. The women are paired up to the main class, and the children are already extensions of that.
So that was what the Shoresh, and the women were also connected.
Yes, that's right. You know, right. The woman, the wife of each Shoresh was the Shoresh, because the Shoresh is really paired. But I'm only speaking about the many. I'm not speaking about the other side of it, the pair. Like Adam and Chava, right? Adam was the super soul. What about his wife Chava? She was the super soul pair of him in terms of men and women.
So is the woman?
That's the way God created them. But what the Banishim did was separate the feminine components into a separate person. You see, but that separation was that the feminine component was taken from Adam, so that Adam remained the mashpia, and the woman became what's called the mushpa. Or Adam was the giver, and the woman became the receiver aspect of that person. You see. But that goes into a whole different area. But they're pairs. You see, Adam and Chava are pairs as super souls. But when we speak about super souls or Shrosh Manachim, we speak about the man. Because the man element is the source element, whereas the woman is the recipient element of that cherish. But essentially, it's really pairs. That's what it is. You see. Yes, you understand the problem?
I hear you. I mean, you understand.
In order, yeah.
It's hard
To grasp that, we have to go into the whole concept of male-female. And what does that have to do with neshamas, you see? That's something someday. But that's a very complex topic. It is. Because the truth of the matter is, to really go into that, you have to know a lot of fundamentals which are some advanced material. Really. You have to know things about the whole nature's creation itself, because the man and woman reflect the whole way the world is created. So it goes into the whole creative process itself. That's why. The more advanced level, but, we will get to that. Okay, I want to. Yes.
When any group that I belonged to, the primary undertone was always that we're right and they're wrong. And I'm hearing the same thing from you, that
we're right in what way?
Well, that the Jews are special, that the Goyim don't have the capacity to, they are not, etc., etc., etc. They fell at some point, and to get themselves back on the right track, they have to do X, Y, Z, and many of them can't do it. But we are special. Where does this come from? I mean, I've read parts.
Special in what way?
Well, in what you're saying, that they are the 70 and they fell, and we are the one, we are chosen. Now, I've been part of other groups where they believed that they were the chosen, and and I heard people who spoke and were educated and were supposedly even tzaddikim, Where is it written, what you're speaking of? I mean, because in between the lines, I mean, I've read parts of the Torah, but I don't see that there.
All this information is essentially in the Kabbalah, and in Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, this would be in the Derech Hashem. In Derech Hashem itself, in the way of God, it says that He will, and it's based on the Kabbalah. It's based on the progression of the Neshamas. You see, you have problems with that. When you say we're chosen, it's not a question that we're chosen, really. We're not chosen. But God is not a bigot. God didn't choose us for anything. The difference is that we chose God. You have to think in verse. God didn't choose us. The difference was that we were part of man. We were part of a man. We were part of a race that chose God. We said to the Bnei Shalom, we want to stick with you. We want to ride it out to the end. And a lot of people said, we don't want to ride it out to the end. So God didn't choose us. That's a complete mistake. You see what I'm saying? What I'm saying is it's exactly the reverse of what you normally hear. We're not special in any way. If we're special, it's because we made ourselves special. We broke our backs and we bent our necks to subjugate the physical to the spiritual, whereas no one else was interested. That's what it was. Now, why is it? And in that way, we're chosen. In the sense that we chose to be this nation. We could have been part of these people. We were no luckier than them, really. It wasn't a question of luck. It was a question of hard work.
Are you saying their souls are not reincarnated? That they don't come back and they don't, I mean, from what I understand, Judaism, there is the theory of reincarnation. Are you saying that the Goyim deal only in the current world, I mean, and have for the last 3,000 years, and they don't have a chance to work out what we may have a chance to work out?
What essentially is, and what it is, what I went through a couple of weeks ago, and I'll just mention what I've gone through, what you may want to know is, why is this good today responsible for what he sure did 3,000 years ago? Why? That's the question you want to know. And that has to do with the structure of the Neshamas. Because enough of them, all the Goyim who live today are in some way connected to those Neshamas that lived then, but in great fragments. So that if you had one Shurish that lived then, in those times, you see, when that Shurish did what he did, in certain ways, his Neshama became the root of Neshamas that came from him. So that all these other Neshamas that are coming from him are really him, or aspects of him. So it's not like they have a different thing. Why are they responsible for what he did? In certain ways, they are him, but in a different frame. You see, the reason why it's so strange to understand is because we don't understand how Neshamas are. And I said also that another very important premise, a popular misconception. You think, for example, all of us are in this room and we're all separate people, aren't we? Totally separate. So you think that we all have separate personalities. And in a certain sense it's true. We are all separate consciousness, right? I am me and you are you see. And each one has a separate self. So you think that just like we are all essentially separate individuals, you think that all man vertically was separate. So you think that my ancestors were completely separate to me. It's like, I had an ancestor called Avram, and I have nothing to do with Avram. What I have to do with Avram? He was Avram and I'm me. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, I'm me and he's he, you know what I mean? That's what you think. That's the mistake. Because the essential thing has to do that vertically, in terms of the history of men, vertically it is a progression of Neshamas. And that Neshamas from the beginning, from Adam to the end of time, are constantly connected. You see, as roots to branches. So that those branches are really aspects of those original roots. And so on. So that the forefathers are not different individuals than the descendants. But that in some incredible way, it's all one network. You see what I'm saying? You and I may be separated, but you are not separated from Sarah, the wife of Avram. In some way, you are an aspect of what she was. Hence, what she did, in some way, molds you and predestines your neshama in a certain way. Why? Not because you're lucky, because you are a piece of that neshama. In some way, you connect with Sarah. You see? The same thing, the Goyim who live on the world are not individuals who have nothing to do with these people who live in the first 20 generations. These Goyim are results of those shwashim. And in some way they used to be part of those neshamas. You see. And when they were parts, they were not separate consciousness at all. See, that's the thing. And why was it constructed that way? Because it has to do with the nature of Olam Haba. But this is the basic premise. That the neshamas, from the beginning to the end of time, are connected in a network, so that it's a constant, in a certain sense, replication process. But each replication is a quantitatively greater replication than the one before it. That's why mankind expands more and more people. But you think that just because there are more and more people, there are more and more new people. That's not true. You are not new. You have been here before. And now that you are not an individual on yourself, you are at some time related to the consciousness of another person who was a shurish, who was a master neshama. And in some way you are related to that consciousness as a chelek. You see? In fact, for example, there's an interesting thing that there's a very great tzaddik. There were two very great tzaddikim. I don't know if you heard them. The Rabbi Elimelech of Lezent, the Noam Elimelech, and his brother Rabbi Zisha Lezent. There were two brothers, and they were extraordinary tzaddikim, and they lived. They lived in the end of the 1700s. So once Rabbi Zisha said to the Noam Elimelech, his brother, he said to him, "I don't understand. You and I are very great tzaddikim, and we were once part of Adam Rishon. Why did we allow him to sin?" Strange question. I said, what went into us? We were part of him. We were an aspect of his consciousness. We were some element of his impulse in a state of awareness. We constitute a section of his impulse. Why did we let him do it? So the other brother answered something which I don't understand. He said, the truth is we didn't want him to do it. But we wanted to show him, he thought that if he would eat the das, you see, he would become a mini God himself. So we let him do it, to show that he was wrong. I don't understand that answer, but in any case, this is the reason. But the point is, that's what it is. That's what Rabbi Zisha said. He says, I understand why. Because that's what it was. We were all parts of evolution. So that's why the picture that I'm presenting is contrary to American or the concept of democracy. It is. It's hard for a Democrat and for an American citizen to acknowledge this because it's so contrary. Because you're brought up with the belief all men are created equal. That is not true. All men are not created equal. All men would be created equal if all men were totally different individuals, one having nothing to do with the other. If human souls were entirely separated from each other, so that each neshama was an isolate by itself, then what you do has nothing to do with somebody else and will not affect somebody else. But if you are part of a vast network, an array of neshamas, not just an array of neshamas in terms of a network, but a network whose progression is from roots to branches, you see, then it's not true that you're an individual, but that in some point of time, in a primordial existence, you are an aspect of somebody else's mind, who then became its own person. You see. And because of that, you are what that person was, at least to a certain degree. Not entirely. Because if you were nothing more than a piece of that other neshama who did bad or did good, why bring you back? You're brought back because you're brought back as an individual. You're separated from the aspect of that consciousness. Why? So that you can become your own consciousness and do something for yourself. Because the Buddhism doesn't like what that church did for you. So the Buddhism says, do it on your own. You see. But because you were part of that church, you see, and you've got to undo damages that he did, you must come back with hereditary aspects. All men are not created with the same intelligence at all. What's the variation of intelligence? What? A normal curve? So you have people who are retarded, people who are very slow intelligence, and then you have people who are geniuses. and then there's a mass of people in the middle. Why? Why does God do that? Why is there a bell curve over here? Why? Are all men created equal? Not in God's eyes, but why does the Bereshit do that? And I say to you that He would create all men equal. He would. If all men were separate, isolated units, one having nothing to do with the other. But that's not the structure of men. That's not the structure of history. And because it's not the structure, you are not created equal. You are dependent on what your history was before you came into existence. But you must add to that. You are now a separate person, and you will forever remain a separate person. You will not go back. You will never become the consciousness of an aspect of consciousness of Adam Rishon. Adam, the way he was, will never again exist. We will not all of a sudden, all collectively, be forced to come together again into one person called Adam. Never again. Because every time there's a division, every time there's a separation, that separation means that a new person has been created. A new consciousness has been created. But that consciousness is the aspect of that old consciousness. But the Bereshit creates that new aspect to go on its own, to do what it can do by itself. You see what I'm saying? Does that answer the question? It may be hard to live with that, because it's so different than the way we're taught. But the way you're taught and what you see is erroneous. Don't confuse neshamas with bodies. Even though every body is separate, don't assume that every consciousness is therefore separate in all of time. That's the mistake where it's coming from. And about your question, chosen, we're not chosen. We chose. And there's a very big difference between the perpetrator of a crime and the victim. You see what I'm saying?
Are we the perpetrators or the victims?
What I'm saying is that you cannot. We essentially are the perpetrators in the sense that we chose to build ourselves in tzaddikim, at least from our form and down, and we are part of that soul system that chose to go with God and really go with it to whatever degree of hardship it would entail. All going with the world of what are parts of the aspects of consciousness of neshamas that chose not to do that. Now, you may say, well, I sometimes see goyim that are really extraordinary people. My answer to you is very simple. We do not really know, what a Jew is and what is a goy is at this point. Because of the incredible intermixture of all peoples, there are many goyim today who have Jewish neshamas. You see. Now, since we are human beings, we have to go by a certain law. Because we have to say that your mother was Jewish, you're Jewish. Because we're human beings. We cannot look into the neshama of a person and say, who? That's a goy. That's not possible. Although it's interesting, like I say, sometimes this tzaddikim who can do it. In fact, I've heard of a specific instance where I know where the tzaddik, sometimes I mentioned, the Ribnitz Rebbe, there was a woman that came to him that was a gurus. She was a convert. You see, and she came to for bracha, and he gave her a bracha, and then when she left, he said to one of the Rabbonim, she's a Christian, wasn't she? How did he know? Nobody said anything to him. But he was able to see by the kind of light that comes out from the person which is invisible. It's a spiritual aura which a very great tzaddik can access. He can see by that light that it's not a Jewish neshama. It is a Jewish neshama, but there's something in it, you see, because she was a Gurus, and she was a Gurus Tzedekis. She was an Elech woman. But you could see something in there. You got to see past that into a shurish of some sort of what the original origin was.
Does it say that a Gurus is not a pure Jew?
Well, obviously, it would seem that even a Gurus isn't, but there's a certain residue that Gurus has to work out over time. You see, there's a residue. But a tzaddik has to see the residue even though it's disconnected already. So even though the neshama may be completely Jewish now, he can see what the residue was before that, even though it's now separated from the person. You see what I'm saying? Now, this is the exterior of history. Let's look at the interior of it. Let's look at the neshamas themselves and see what happened to the neshamas of all these people. We see what happened in terms of the people. We described a great deal about the events. But let's look into the neshamas. say that a goy has no access to Olam Haba directly, except through certain variant ways, certain deep, specific, particular ways. What do we mean? What does that mean that a goy no longer has really access and a Jew does? We say, well, the difference is in the neshama. But what is it about a neshama that does it for one and doesn't do it for another? You see. And the question that's asked, what about a Jew, for example, who's a Rasha? He's a Rasha. He's an evil person. What about him? Why is it that he can go to Olam Haba, or he has something to do with Olam Haba, and a guy who's a tzaddik is inferior to that? Why? Where's the justice in that? That was another question that was asked prior. In order to understand this, we have to look into the construction of the neshama itself. Other Rishon, like we said, has a super neshama. I will draw a circle to represent that super neshama. A neshama does not look like a circle, nor is it a sphere.
How do you know?
If this class ever makes it, no. No. If this class ever survives it, I mean, these things, and we get to the point when I start on an advanced level, I can give you a much clearer understanding of what neshama really is. You can almost grasp an essence about it. But we can't go into that. It would be much too great a deviation. Take, for all our practical purposes, a neshama. Okay, it's not a great circle, but that's the neshama of Adam Rishon. Looks pretty small, doesn't it? Okay, that's his neshama. Adam Rishon had the capacity with this neshama to transform physical reality. He failed. He failed. What happens? What happens to a neshama that fails? And what I say to you, what happens to a neshama that fails, and it's clear, a neshama that fails, meaning a neshama which chooses itself against God. That's what it means, fail. A neshama that says, me, a person that says, me, not you. I am a God. I retain independence from you, Rebbeinu Shalom. You see, I have a koyach and a power unto myself. A neshama that thinks even in the slightest sense that it has even some aspect of God, or would call itself by that name, what would happen to that neshama Misal Hadin? Really, it would be instantly annihilated. Why? Not because God would annihilate it. It would annihilate itself. Now I'm going to explain to you very briefly, to some degree, why that happens. I will not go into it. It is an extraordinarily deep matter. An extraordinarily deep matter. But let me just say this piece here. We have said a long time ago that the neshama is a chelik elokah. It's a shadow of God. And most of you people, I don't think, have been here when we had that cheer. And the neshama is a shadow of God because it possesses the essence of self or self-awareness. And we have said very simply is that to possess self-awareness is to be a shadow of God. And only in that respect. You have nothing to do with God. Absolutely nothing. Except that you are a self. Just like God is a self. God knows that He is. You know that you are. That capacity to know that you are is a shadow of God. Why? Very basically, because to possess a self means that you possess something which you alone have and no one else has, no one shares. In your internal eye, in your internal sense of eye, is there anything that shares that? Is there anything inside? No. That eye says you, existence. All existence contrasts to that me, does it? Me or existence as a contrast to me. Right? That means that all existence is outside of self. All of it. The ability of a self or neshama to look at God and say, me, you, means that there is something in that neshama which has the ability to see God outside of itself. Now that's an extraordinary thing. And that creation, the ability of an entity to see God as outside means that in certain ways you are almost outside of God. Almost, but not quite. But that almost is mind-boggling. Because it means that God created another being that can turn around and say, you, as a separate entity. This is an incredible creation. Therefore, the neshama, because it itself is a shadow of God Himself, because it retains its own intrinsic independence, separate from all existence, just like God does. That's why neshama has free will. Why does a person have free will? Do you think anyone could be given free will? Do you know what free will means? Free will means that you can choose. If I say you choose this direction or that, and I say you choose which direction you want if I give you two directions. When I say that you have free will, do you know what that means? That means that there is nothing in reality or in existence which pressures you more to one side than the other side. But that the ultimate decision comes from the deep foundation of your inner core, which is beyond law or beyond cause and effect. Because if there's something that forces you to choose, it would be a cause, and you will be the effect. You will be the effect. So therefore, in order to have free will, you must be beyond cause and effect itself. There cannot be one aspect of existence, one law in existence itself, which will incline you in one direction versus the other. The choice must come from the intrinsic I, which is beyond existence. Now that's amazing. There's only one being who has free will, really. That's God. Why is it that God can do whatever He wants to do? Why? Because God is outside of all reality. That's why. God is beyond all cause and effect, beyond all existence. So He's beyond the laws and regulations of existence. To say in Hebrew, God is beyond choik. Choik means regulation, law, cause and effect, pattern, structure, organization. God has no organization. He's beyond organization because He is not in any way structured, organized. Because He's not conceived. For a neshama to have free will means that a neshama also must be beyond existence. But my God to be beyond existence, that's almost like a God, isn't it? Yes, it is. It is almost, but not quite. It is so far beyond all of existence that when God looks at the neshama and says, choose freely, the Buddha says, I will not influence you one iota. You imagine that? God, who is the very essence and process of all existence, says to the neshama, you are beyond this process. You are beyond anything that I will do. I will not control you. So if I don't control you, then what does it? Where is it coming from? It's coming from the you that's beyond all existence also. So, since you're connected to God, because obviously He made you, God knows what you're going to do. God knows what you will choose. Well, how can He know? If you're beyond all law and all cause, then how does God know what you're going to do? He knows what you're going to do, even though you're totally free, because He created you. So in some incredible, primordial, ultimate, absolute sense, you are not free of God. But you are free of God in that you really have free will. So you're not beyond God's knowledge, but you are beyond His power in the way when He gives you free will. You hear that statement? If you have any idea who God is, and we've gone through a whole sheet of that, that is one of the most incredible things that has ever existed, or I've ever said. To have free will is to be, in a sense, kaviyocho, beyond God's power. And He grants you that freedom. That's true freedom. Real freedom. The freedom that you think you have with the way you are on this world is ridiculous. You think you're a free person? You're not a free person. You think you're free because you can do whatever you want here, you can run after. All you're doing is simply following the pleasures and privacy of your body or mind and so on. You see? You're simply submitting to all the pressures that are going on, really. To be truly free is to decide without any pressure. It's because you decide something that you want to do. So what happens when a neshama like that, a neshama who chooses to do something, you see, suddenly makes a decision. That decision is called a yesh me'ayin. You know what yesh me'ayin means? Yesh me'ayin means something from nothing. God is in the world of nothing, ayin. Because God is beyond choik. God is beyond cause of law. So the world of God is called ayin. Nothing. It means its existence which is beyond any regulatory aspect. When you do something with free will, then you are doing what God does. You behave like a God. Because it means that the choice that you make is coming from the world of ayin. Totally free. So that choice is something from nothing. Which means that when you choose, you act like God. Now, what happens when you choose, in that choosing process, in the act of being God, or in a certain sense, acting like Him, you choose to be your own God. That is a contradiction in existence. What you've done, when one puts in front of you a chait or a mitzvah, and you do the sin, when you choose to what? To assert yourself versus His will, what essentially you've done is you're saying what? That I'm more than free will. I'm more than that. I am also independent from God, that I can do what I want to do because I am like God. That results in instant annihilation. Because what you're doing is you are usurping God's power, you see, with a godly act. That's an impossibility. You contradicted your own existence. Because in the world of ayin, only God exists. Really, not you. So to use that world or that power to defy Him is an impossibility. That is instant annihilation. And that is the essence of or sin. When God says to Adam Rishon, on the day that you sin, you will die, well, die doesn't mean be annihilated. But what God should have said to Adam Rishon, but He didn't, and we'll see why. But the Bonishim should have said, on the day that you choose against me, on the day that you decide to be on your own, you will be annihilated. Not because I'm annihilating you, because you will have abused what you are, and you will have set up a contradiction in your own existence. And that contradiction cannot be. You see, you will annihilate yourself. That is the real consequence of a sin. Because what is a sin? A sin says, my will versus God's will. That's really what it's about. When you do it with that consciousness, when you do it with the consciousness of what's called mazin, when you say, who is God to tell me what to do? If you do a sin, you see, because in many ways you don't have the strength not to do it, that's a whole different ball game. But to do a chait with the awareness that I will do what I want to do, I will be my own person, I am God in my own way, that absurdity means annihilation. And the essence of din, the essence of what? Of retribution, comes from the laws of existence itself. God doesn't come down and wipe you out. You wipe yourself out. Because you have activated existence so that it what? It builds on its own contradiction. And plus negates minus. Just like matter negates antimatter. Yes.
Do you mean annihilation from Cholam law?
No, annihilation from being.
Well, what about, let's say
yourself.
Let's say somebody believes in Jesus, speaks to Jesus, and then they find out that it's not right for them, and then they go back. So they're not annihilated, they're not dead because they believe in Jesus.
No. Well, first of all, the people who believe in Jesus, and there's big shilas on that. I mean, in terms of why they believe in it. I mean, whether these people rebel really, have to know what they're doing. But besides that, what we're really saying here is something else. If God has built the world on justice, which He did not build the world on justice. If He had built the world on this, mishpat, din, what's called the hanagat ha-mishpat, then the result of a sin would be annihilation. But the Bonishim did not do that. And that's why the Medrash says in the beginning, that initially God wanted to construct the world on din, meaning that a chait sets up contradictions in existence which annihilate self. And the Bonishim says, if I do that, I will have no one. Because God so understands what Adam would do, even though it did not interfere with what Adam would do. So God said, I will build the world on Rahmanus, on compassion. And what it is that I will set up a new system so that the effect of a transgression of a sin does not annihilate. But listen to this, and this is the thing. What do you mean? How does God do that? If the laws of existence in which He Himself constructs demands annihilation, then what are these subverting? And that shows you the great depth of the Hanagas HaYichud, or what? Or the Rahmanus of God. That the essence of Rachamim, or the essence of compassion, is what? Is a exemption from the law of existence. That's what mercy is. Mercy is an exemption from the laws of existence. Because by the laws of existence, you should be annihilated.
Justice or justice?
The same thing. Justice is based on the laws of existence. The laws of existence means that when you sin, you set up a contradiction in your own existence. So the very laws of your existence should annihilate you. And when the Banishim says, I will have compassion on you, what the Banishim is essentially saying is what? I will exempt that law, and I will create a new law, which is beyond existence itself. What law is beyond existence? The law from the mind of God Himself. That's why the Hanagas HaYichud does not emanate from existence. Din, justice, retribution emanate from existence. Mercy emanates from God, beyond it. Do you see what I'm saying? It's an amazing thing. In order for God to save the world, He created, or He accessed a law or principle in His own mind. That's why it's called the Hanagas HaYichud. Compassion is called the attribute of Yichud. Yichud meaning the absolute unity of God, because only God can transcend existence, and that mechanism transcends existence. So I've given you a very deep view of what justice is and what mercy is, and how the two operate. And we start that because what I want to say is that obviously Adam, who was the first man who transgressed, should have been annihilated. The fact that he wasn't means that as soon as he sinned, the mechanism of mercy was already instituted to change the entire situation. How did that situation change? What was the new state of affairs, you see? What was the new kind of mechanism that was introduced? For that, we will have to do it next week. Good place to start, right?
Yeah.
What's that?
Like the old cereal.
Yeah, the old cereal.
Right there, you have to put.
If you can explain this in a little bit further fashion, as to say, the fact that a person has an ability of choice, it may stem or emerge from the fact that, from the point of existence, the fact that the whole creation is a dichotomous nature. There's two Yetziros, Elyonim, Tachtonim, the earth, and there are two separate dichotomous creations. So from that point of view, a person has the ability of choice. The decision that man makes, that's godly. But the power of choice is
right. What you're saying is
one
true.
that exists not from the essence of the point of
Well, what you're saying is absolutely true. What you distinguish between something called the ability of free will and something called the opportunity of free will. You may not have the opportunity. Whether you have the opportunity or not to choose depends on what God. If you have If you have two choices, for example, let's say only one choice is given in front of me, only one path is in front of me. What am I doing? Even if I have free will, but I only have one option. So where am I going? You see, in that case, you lack the opportunity for another option. So what God can do is prevent you, or can take away the opportunity to choose by simply showing you one road. But for God to take away your ability to choose means that you have to annihilate yourself. Because to be self is synonymous with the ability to choose, but not necessarily with the opportunity to choose.
The ability to choose is tied with the ability of decision, is what you're saying.
Yes, it's the ability. It emanates from the wisdom.
That's the ability of decision.
It emanates, it's within, it can contain within the self, in the self for self.
the opportunity to choose from the dichotomy.
The opportunity to choose means that you have to have two different directions. For example, a neshama, take a pure neshama, which has self-awareness, which is the essence of self-awareness. Does the neshama have really the opportunity to choose? No. It has the ability. I mean, it doesn't have any opportunity. Why? Because where's the neshama going? The neshama will never say, me, God, I have a replacement for God. The neshama would never even talk about itself in godly terms. That's absolute sacrilege. Why? Because in the world of neshamas, the presence of God is totally paramount. Take a candle, right? Take a flashlight and go next to the sun. You see the light of that flashlight? It's absurd. So a neshama with his own sense of self has such proximity to God. What are you talking about God? It's like an absurdity. It's laughable. But take that neshama and put him into a body. Oh, where is God? I don't know. I don't see him. Now you have opportunity to choose. You see that? Because God has vacated himself. And that's what it is. The ability to choose lies within the neshama or the self. The opportunity requires two different worlds, a spiritual and a physical. And the reason why God created the physical world was for the opportunity to choose, so that he can hide. Because you can only have an opportunity to choose when God hides. Free will depends on God hiding. When God doesn't hide, free choice is an absurdity. God must hide, must conceal himself, to then give you the free choice. And what is that free choice? To call yourself a God. You see, because I don't see God, all I see is the reality that I'm in control of. I take what I want, I do what I want, so I'm like a little God, I can do what I want. You can only say that because God is hidden. If God simply would reveal himself for 1 microsecond, you see, you'll be instantly, you'll be in a paralytic state, and that will be the end of your free choice. And the end of the aberration, calling yourself, or even comparing yourself to God. And that's what it is. But the world of the physical was created as an illusion, so that you may think that you are a mind of God, or you may think that you replicate him, or in some way you're like him. But that's a total, like I say, absurdity. You don't even begin to do that, in any sense of the word. But the Buddha wants to give you free choice. Because like we said before, since you are a self, since you have free will, since you can create in terms of will what God can do in terms of existence, God creates reality. You can create will. That's where your domain exists. Your ability to create, yesh ma'ayim, something from nothing, is only the ability to create will. I want, I don't want. That's all you can do. But that's the creation. That is the creation. Because it's beyond all pressure. It's something from emanates within the most deepest recessions of yourself. So it's true creation. Don't minimize it. But it has nothing to do with reality. It's God who creates existence. You can only create will, or choose, or direct self in a certain direction. That's your creation. But that creation is truly free. And in that sense, you reflect God, you see. But you can't begin to compare yourself to Ribono Shel Olam for the simple reason that the Ribono Shel Olam is all existence, from the beginning to the end. So I think we've explored in a very deep way what Adam was doing, and where Adam failed, and what the concept of sin is. We have yet to explore the concept of mercy, and why God, how, to some extent, how the Ribono Shel Olam saved Adam. And in order to do that, we will look at the interior of Neshamas next week to get some grasp of where that chesed manifests itself. Because it obviously manifests itself in Neshamas itself. Okay.